Welcome back. I'm Sherry Trentini, and this is the Life Reclamation Project podcast. And today I have a fantastic guest. Her name is Jade Walker, and she is a veteran journalist with 35 years of experience covering international, national affairs, and the publishing industry, plus obituaries. She is the night news editor at the HuffPost, former overnight editor of the New York Times, AP or Associated Press, Yahoo News, Apple News, as well as a former writer for the AM newsletter at CNN. Prolific. And in her spare time, and I'm using air quotes very, very vigorously, she edits a bit of good news Substack, the N Files on Substack, the Moonlight Reader Society on Substack, and produces the written word quote service. And when she has spare time, she likes to spend that with her husband and her 5 cats. Welcome, Jade. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you. You make me a little tired reading all of that.
Oh, yes, exactly. I'm like, wow, that is an amazing resume. But of course, the thing that stands out to me is the obituary writing, which I have enjoyed reading your work on Substack in the N Files, as well as being a subscriber to a bit of good news, because we need both of those things. We have to talk about things that are ending, but also have a nice little lift. So tell me about your decision to share the N Files and a little bit about what you include in your newsletter.
So, the Enfiled is a newsletter about death and grief and mourning and cemeteries, but it's also written in a way that makes people think, tries to go for a more death positive angle, and
Mm.
tries to treat it as a way that we live is the next process is death, not like the end, which is why I kind of called it the end files, because everybody thinks of, oh, death's the end. We don't know what happens after. So why don't we just treat it as the next step of what we're living through? We have birth, we have teenagehood, we have young adult, we have yay, Crohn's, and then the next. We don't know what's next. So I try to treat death that way in my own life, and I'm trying to share that vision with people as a way to make them a little less afraid of it, a little less um, worried about how they're going to live their life. I also, as an obit writer, definitely believe that life is short. You can die when in one day, or you can live 100 years, but you don't know when. So you might as well live the most you can every single day. And that is also part of the newsletter. I try and share that. So hopefully that comes through in my
Absolutely.
articles and polls. And then I also include at least 6 to 10 obituaries of people who caught my eye that week. And I do that
Mhm.
because I find people fascinating. I think everyone has a story to tell. And if I happen to find one, I will share it. And I hope that my readers like it too.
Well, I want to just go back to what you said about wanting a death positive newsletter. And I think I came across you when I first joined Substack, and I've been on Substack a couple of years now, is because I put in grief, right? That's my niche, I guess. And so I wanted to see who was writing about grief, and you were one of the ones that came up. So when you say death positive, what expand on that a little bit for me?
It's actually two things. One, I think we need to be able to talk about death. I think grieving becomes so much harder when we can't express it, when we can't,
Yeah.
when we keep it just buried inside, or we just try and put it behind us and not actually deal with it. I think that is a real problem in our society today. So by death positive, I mean we're going to be talking about it. We're going to put it out there. We're going to share experiences and learn from them. The second part of it is that I also think that there are good things that can come from death.
Mhm.
An example of this historically is that you had a terrible war in World War II, but there have been huge advances in medicine that were learned on the battlefield. The Halifax explosion happened in Canada, and
Mhm.
that ended up, the explosion actually blew out all of the glass in the city of Halifax. Then all these doctors came in and learned how to treat glass injuries into the eyes that to this day are still being used. Like there are good
Yeah.
things that can come from death, and one of the biggest ones you see today is organ donation.
Yes.
Some
Yes.
people can be living donors, some people do it after death, but this is a way to pass on a really good legacy and to make death slightly a little less painful because you know you're helping many, many other people. There's a coffee shop in California. A man lost the love of his life in a drunk driving accident. He survived and he'd been a barista and he always wanted to have a coffee shop. So he's opening one and he's named it after her. And he's got her name was
Oh,
Rain. And he's got these little like old diner sheets that the waitresses used to write your orders on. He calls them rain
yes.
checks. And he has people write who they miss or thoughts about people that they've lost. And then they hang them on the wall so everybody can read them. You know, they talk about death in the place and about grieving. Every single line is long because every barista is willing to talk to you if you're having a rough day, if you're struggling with grief. This is a place where the community can come and talk about the pain and the loss that they're feeling and not feel like they're taking someone's time or intruding on people or they're embarrassed. There's no need to because everyone there has experienced something like that. So
Yes.
I see stories like that and I like to share them.
Oh my gosh, that is a beautiful story. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, did you start off writing obituaries? Is that where how you view death has evolved, or have you had life experiences that has also contributed to that wisdom?
Well, as a journalist, in the past, usually the people who wrote obituaries were brand new journalists to learn the job, or people who were kind of burned out and got shoved onto the obit desk.
Yeah.
But in the past 30 or 40 years, that has completely changed. And the people who now write obituaries are the best writers at the paper. They know how to create a beautiful feature, tell wonderful stories, create profiles, and do really good interviews. They're truly investigative reporters, and they've won Pulitzers for doing so. So I started seeing that happen as I got into journalism in the 90s. And then when I went to college to study journalism, a friend I had gone to college with had died, and my mother sent me the obit. And that was the first time I ever had an obit arrive in the mail. And I read it, and I had known that she had died, but seeing it in print made it real. Like
Mm,
she's my age. She's not going to college like I am. She's really dead. And I realized the power of that. So I started looking into the history of obits and what they mean to people and how some would put them in their Bibles for future generations to read. And then as the 90s went virtual, that also happened. So now you have people able to share obits through email, now social media or
mhm,
on websites. People create their own websites. Legacy came along and created a place where families could buy space to memorialize someone they lost. And it really opened up the grieving space in such a way that not only could people connect in communities, but the stories of those people aren't lost when they die. They're still available for
mhm.
people to check back on birthdays and death days and just whenever you think about them. So I have really enjoyed being part of that process of things
Yeah.
going from print to online. And in the process of that happening, I helped to found the Society of Professional Obituary Writers. We meet online. We had a newsletter until the pandemic, and then we used to also meet. We'd have an ObitCon every 2 years, and we'd have a
Oh,
contest where you gave out Grimmies instead of Grammys for like best obituary writer of a famous person, best obit of a not famous person, and
yeah,
best body of work. And so, yeah, we did that until 2019, but since the pandemic, it has been really hard to do that again. But it was
exactly.
really helpful because we were able to share tips and ideas on how to write really great obits and how to talk to people who may not necessarily be in a subject we know anything about, or in
Right.
a culture we don't know anything about. So yeah, it's been really wonderful, like seeing obits go from something I got in the mail from my mom and really affecting me to actually turning it into part of my life.
Mhm. So, how have you seen obituaries change from the early 90s through to today? Because one of the things that we talked in a previous conversation about, yes, the funeral home puts that out there, and then you can be on, as you said, like legacy.com or another spot where it'll be always searchable on the internet. But how have you noticed a evolution as to how what people are saying, the length of them, what's changed, or and is it a positive change?
I would not necessarily say all of it's positive because back in the 90s, we had hundreds of local newspapers that would cover the deaths of local people. And so they would write about them. And the people who weren't necessarily huge in the community would still get a smaller write-up.
Hmm.
The funeral homes and the families could take out advertising, classified ads
Yes.
for, but that's by the word. So the length of how long your obituary is could depend solely on the money that's left behind or the
Right.
people who are available. And I never really thought that was fair. Unfortunately, because so many hundreds of newspapers have gone under
Yes.
in modern times, that history is just lost. You can't even search for it,
Right.
which is really frustrating. The obituary writers have either been laid off or bought out or retired or moved to other desks because the newspapers would rather have customers pay for their obits than have the reporters write them. This is a big struggle for us. So only a few major newspapers still write obits.
Hmm.
And this is not the only field that that's happening to. I mean, book right now, book reviews. There's only 10 newspapers in America that still cover books right
Oh,
now. And the Associated Press does not anymore. So like that's been like everything in the newspaper industry as these journalists are being let go, as the field is changing. The people who run the newspapers are more focused on money. And
right.
so they can get money from customers that they would instead of having to pay money for an obituary writer. That said, I think because back in the 90s they were more formalized, you
Hmm.
followed a strict guideline of, okay, here's who died, and here's what they did, and here are who the survivors were. It was a strict template. And
Yes.
that has changed dramatically. So now we can tell stories about people because we have the length to do so online. There's no
Yes.
limit based on how much page space you have in columns. So
Yeah.
we are able to do full stories. We're able to do 10 photos instead of one. We're able to do audio and video clips of people. In some cases, I once did one of a woman who did recipes. So I was able to share one of her recipes. So I
Oh,
love that we can do all of these additional things online and really give obits a breath that I feel they deserve.
oh, that's amazing. And with your experience of being a writer, when you're talking with the families and friends, and as you said, being an investigative reporter in order to get this information to put something together, how have you did you have skills to help sort of deal with their grief if they were overcome, or how did you find that they're being able to be invited to talk about the person that they lost? Was that did that help them to share more? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It is a process to learn. In the past, when we had journalists who'd been on the job for 30 or 40 years, they would share that knowledge with the younger reporters and teach them how to
Hmm.
be compassionate and understanding. And I would say we don't have that anymore because a lot of the older reporters are gone. So I fear
Hmm.
that that's going to be difficult for younger reporters to learn. And I'm trying to teach it as much as I can. But I always know when I go to a grieving family, 50% of them are just not going to talk to you because they can't. They're not able to focus
Yes.
just yet. The other 50% want desperately to talk about the person that they've lost. And this is
Oh,
another way to keep them alive. It's also a way to give your view of that person.
yes.
So, like I often say, if I talk to my mom versus my best friend, you're going to get very two different views of who I am. Um,
Yes.
and I actually really recommend if someone wants to leave behind sources, do that in your will. Talk to these five people. They really know who I am. And I say
Right.
that because so many families are estranged. You don't want to talk to
Yes.
someone who does nothing but badmouth the deceased.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I really enjoy being able to sit down with the people who want to talk. And I also find that if you talk to them and you're human, you're kind, you listen, they will talk to other people and say, talk to her.
Oh,
She'll listen to you, she'll get your stories. So
yes.
that helps too. But you gotta just understand that some people are going such through such terrible times
Of
and
course.
suddenly terrible that they can't form words. And you see this online actually with celebrity deaths. We just had one from Dawson's Creek, an actor who had died,
Yes.
and everybody expected every member of the cast member to post a tribute within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And one of the actors could not because
Yeah.
he couldn't do it. Like, I
Yeah.
just lost a dear friend of 20 years. I
Yes.
can't form a sentence. How am I supposed to write a tribute for people? And so when he did like a week or two later, a lot of people gave him guff about it, but I did not. Because you have to understand it takes time for some people to find the right words when they're in pain.
And then I think that is also just, I think, a symptom of our society about our expectations on other people, regardless of the situation, and especially having lost a friend. They're not acting and being able to produce content to appease their fans and the fans of the lot who they've lost. So that's unfortunate. That isn't fair play by those people out there, and tisk tisk on them for certain.
Unfortunately, the internet is not really known as a compassionate space.
Well, there's that. There is
The
that.
anonymity of things often allows people to just spout off whatever they're thinking. I have no
Right.
problem with
Right.
people thinking it, but you don't necessarily have to always say it or type
Exactly.
it.
Exactly.
And I really hope that as you know, I create communities in my world that I really promote that compassion.
Yes.
So, you know, I ran a blog of death for 10 years, and all it was obituaries. And I had to moderate every single post because of the comments. And some, you know, sometimes you're writing about mass murderers
Right.
and, you know, kidnappers or rapists. They're not going to get good tributes behind. And I'm fine with some being truthful,
Yes.
but I don't necessarily want people attacking in that space. That's
Right.
not really the place to do it.
Yeah.
So I would allow some and not others. In that I would allow a recitation of the facts, but not general, just accusatory things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that we have a respect to people that is greatly lacking online. And
Mhm.
so if we can find that compassion ourselves and share that with others in times of need. That's what I do when I'm writing an obit. I just feel like they're going through a tough time. If I was in that situation, I don't know that I could talk to a reporter. I'd have to find someone to be my spokesperson.
Right.
They know what
Right.
I want you to say. Just do it and then give me a couple days.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's unfortunate that I guess there's nothing that people won't have a comment or, want to share their opinion about, not even the death of somebody or how somebody's acting. That's the sad thing. But such is life in 2026.
All we can do
Um,
is model good behavior and hope others follow.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So in your last End Files post, which was called Loss in Pieces, you included a poll. And I love that you have these polls. Sometimes I don't get to your post right away, so I can't weigh in with mine. But I do love this one where you ask the question, what do you think about writing your own obituary? Stellar question.
Thank
And
you.
I just before we jumped on here, I just went to look to see what the results are because I'm still very curious. I know it's still running for a few days and it will be closed by the time I post this. However, I wanted to let people know that at this point, 14% of people have already written their obituary. Now, statistically, I know nothing about the obituary side of things when it comes to how people are approaching that, but I was pleasantly surprised at that 14% number. Now, is that something that you find people are, is there a trend of that, or where do you think that would come from? Is it an opportunity for them to make sure that particular people are included in their story? What are your thoughts?
I think with the rise of social media, people have um, some people have a brand to maintain. So if they die, they want to keep that brand after their death, and that's why they write their own obits. Other people just do all of their relationships online. They have friends for years that they've never met in person, and so they want to be able to share their story once they're gone. And I also think that there's a lot of in the past 10 years, especially, a lot of death cafes have started where people will meet in a cafe and talk about death and talk about wills and obits and things like that. And a lot of them have been doing write your own obit workshops. I see a lot of retirement homes doing write your own obit workshops, which I think is fantastic. So I think this is one of those things that people are starting to think more about and be able to put their own spin on their
Mhm.
last word.
Okay. So, because I hadn't thought about that, but I didn't realize that. And having had a conversation with TJ, TJ, who death ready. And we didn't talk about that when we had a conversation, but that's brilliant because then again, people are more actively involved in their, and that's part of their death file, right?
Yes.
These, this is what I want included. Now, 14% said that they would hire a pro. You had mentioned that you have an association that you started for professional obituary writers. I too wouldn't have thought to look for a professional obituary writer.
Really?
I didn't know that that was, aside from if they worked at the local newspaper, where again, that, as you said, that might have been a new person on the desk, or it could be somebody who is at the end of their career otherwise. But I was unaware of that until we had chatted. So you could, is there like write my obit professional.com or and I'm
A
not
lot of
being
them are
sick.
actually in my society,
Yep.
and it's not mine, it's all of our society. I just helped co-found it. But also, they create relationships with local funeral homes. So the funeral homes will offer you a template that your family can fill out, or they'll say, or if you want a professional, we have a freelancer in the community who does this
Okay.
and can
Okay.
can recommend you to them. So that often happens. But you can also search for, freelance obituary writer in most search engines and look in your area and find them.
Well, I'm totally going to do that afterwards because I'm curious about that because I have to say in the city that I live, my association with obituaries from a newspaper standpoint was from my hometown. And now I can look at those online, of course, in their newspaper, but also, through word of mouth and social media, I find out that people have passed, unfortunately. Whereas in a city that I've lived for over a decade, I don't associate, or I guess maybe, knock on wood, that I haven't had much to do with losing people here in my community yet, or at all. So it didn't even dawn on me that this would be something that would be readily available, but I'm going to find that out. Now I want to know because that's very
Hiring a
curious to me.
professional, saves the family members from trying to write your obituary in a time where they're already struggling.
Of
You
course.
have someone who does this for a living, and so they're
Mhm.
able to do interviews and talk to people. They also sit with you and give you a chance to tell your side of the story and how you want to be remembered, which is really nice. And then again, you can say, I want you to talk to these five people and they'll tell you who to
Yes.
talk to next. So there's a little bit of control that I think a lot
Yeah.
of people really like having about what happens after you die, because so often you die, you never know what's in your obit. And this way you can know in
Right.
advance. Writing your own obit also has that control aspect, which I think a lot of people are
Yes.
doing. And if you were wanting to write your own, which I have, and I highly recommend and also update quite often, I would suggest reading a wide variety of published obits in the
Mhm.
newspaper, online, family written ones, just to kind of get a style of what people are putting in. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean you have to stay with that style. Do it your own personality way. Some people do nothing about what they do for a living and it's all about their life. Some people do nothing but what their family life has been and how much that pleased them and made them a joy in the community. Some people make it very funny, which is always a
Yeah.
hoot when you're reading them. And then some people write very angry obits and use it as their chance to right all the wrongs that they have been holding in their lives. So you have the control to choose how your style is if you write your own. Um, it gives you a chance to think about how you want to be remembered.
And I think
What is
the that is a very empowering thing, especially if you are taking that on and you're, and I guess even if you're on death's door, I don't know, but that would be like you 57% of the people who answered the poll have said that they have not, but they're curious. They'd consider it. So I thought, and I think did this years ago in some capacity, not a real obituary. I think it was in the spirit of an obituary from some other type of teaching. But how have you, so have you taught, you've done your own, but you have also instructed other people or worked with them to help them sort of edit it or hone in on certain things, or how have you supported others who have written their own?
So I've taught journalists how to do them. And what I do when I teach young journalists is I have them write their own, and then I pair them up and have them write someone else's.
Mhm.
And then switch your view and read them both. So you get to see how you wanted to be portrayed, and you get to see how someone else portrayed you. And that can really make you go back to your original obit and want to change things about how
Right.
you're noticed. So this is something that you can do with your best friend. Sit down and write all your obit stuff and then have them write one for you and see what comes up. And I think it's a fun way to sit with someone because you're sharing memories with each other and you're talking about the lives you've had together and how you want to be remembered. So I highly recommend people do it if you are interested in your legacy, if you're interested in being remembered. Um, I also think it's a good way to come up with a couple of stories that you want to be remembered for.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw this after 9/11. I was working at the New York Times at that time, and we did what's called portraits of grief. They were
Okay.
just, 2 or 3 inch obituaries because there were thousands of people to write about who had died so suddenly. And they would go to the family and get one thing about the person. And that's how they would be remembered, whether it be he was afraid of elevators or he would go out with his dad to ice cream every Sunday. That was the thing that they got remembered for. And hopefully your obit will be longer than 3 inches.
Yeah.
But what are the things that you want people to remember you
Mm,
for? What do you want them to think about when they think about you? Not a lot of people are getting buried anymore, so we don't always have a place to go. An obit is a place where we can always read it. We can listen to audio, we can listen to video and have that tangible thing of, oh yeah, I remember she did used to like that particular drink, and now whenever I see it, I will think of her.
yeah,
So
exactly.
that's a good way to like think for yourself on your legacy, but also how others will remember you after you're gone.
I
Um,
love
if you want to write your own, I can highly recommend a book.
it.
There
Okay.
is one called Yours Truly, an
Okay.
obituary writer's guide to telling your story.
Yeah.
And it's written by the former Wall Street Journal obituary writer James Haggerty, Hagerty. And he's a fantastic, brilliant obituary writer. He offers step-by-step guides and he offers examples of stories and examples of obits that he's run. And I highly recommend that to anybody who wants to read a very fun story on how to write your own obit. Now, if you want
I
to
love
go
it.
the professional way, which is perfectly fine, like I said, you can Google for those people. You can talk to your funeral directors.
Yeah.
But this would allow you to sit down with the writer and share those stories. If maybe you don't have a writing skill, maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's not your forte.
Yeah.
Um, it would allow your friends and family to do this, and you could hear those stories before you die, so you know how they're going to remember you, which is always nice.
Oh,
I know a lot of people who say, "I wish I could be a ghost and visit my funeral to see who shows up and what they say." This is a
right.
way to do that. Um,
Okay.
and more importantly, their friends and family can share those stories with freedom of
Yes.
you being alive, as opposed to the stress of them already grieving you and then trying to come up with whatever that 1 or 2 stories is to remember you by, which may not be the story they want to remember you by a week later.
Exactly.
And then, best of all, you can read the obituary before you go and update it until
Yeah.
the very end. So
Yes.
that's
Yes.
always
Yes.
nice to have. And then when it's ready to go, your family doesn't have to write it. You already know what it says, and you can take it as a way, if you write it early enough, as a way to live an obit-worthy life. So you keep adding cool things to it, or just be satisfied that you've lived a good life and your story will be told later.
I love that. An obit worthy life, where, you get to brag a little, but talk about more of, what fulfilled you in this lifetime. And when we're able to tell story and to make the, sort of do a little flyover of our life, maybe what we put in the obit might be a surprise to some people because it's not something that we talk about all the time.
Exactly.
And the last question that you had on the poll was, does this feel, it feels very conceited, and 14% felt that it was conceited. And I wonder, my question that I would like to ask those people is it because there's a morbidity sort of vibe when it comes to writing your obit? Just because you write your obituary doesn't mean that you're, gonna keel over in your chair after put your pen down. But I think that's the sort of the sense. You don't want to mess, we are still in that zone where, it's not a death positive idea in order to do that, because we don't want to call in some type of, you know, whatever, in order for that to be our literally our last words. So it's not that we are wanting to convince people to do that, but I think that's an interesting observation and an interesting poll question that you put on there about asking if it's conceited or not.
And I like that question because um, I think the people who do see it as conceited may not necessarily want to self-evaluate, and that challenges you to do so. But also, those 14% are my target audience because now I know these people are already reading my newsletter, so they
Yeah.
know I write death positive things, but I haven't gotten them yet. So I still got some challenge to do.
And I think that is the big thing. I have seen the conversation around death, about grief, expand significantly over the last 15 over the last 15 years, and it continues to create new veins of getting people to be more involved in the process and allowing themselves to be included in sort of sharing what they're experiencing. And we see that obviously on Substack, on social media, and in other, and even how death is portrayed and grief being portrayed in some television in Hollywood. I have been impressed with some shows as to how they showed the process rather than sort of bypassing it or not addressing the grief part at all. Somebody has died, but then, you know, they've moved on to whatever the next segment of the show is. So I do appreciate that. Have you noticed that where we're seeing that death and grief is becoming portrayed differently in things that we're watching, the things that we're consuming on television and on social media?
Absolutely. And I think one of the perfect examples of that is the Apple TV show Shrinking, which is hilarious. It's with Harrison Ford and Jason Segel. And so we all watched it because it was Harrison Ford on TV. And it's about a bunch of shrinks who are working in an office together, but one of them is getting to the end of his life. One of them has lost his wife. And then there's the third one who's sort of in the middle of each. And as I try to tell people about how hilarious this show is, they'll go online and they'll read what it's about. And they're like, it's a show about grief. I don't want to watch a show about grief. I'm already sad. I'm like, but it's funny. They handle it very well. And they
Exactly.
show, some people do handle it very well and some people just do not. And here's why that's happening. And
Yeah.
the process that it's taking these characters to deal with it
Mhm.
and to not make quite so many mistakes and to prepare a little better. Um, I personally think that, writing a will is another thing that a lot of people do not do
Mhm.
along with writing their obit. And I think that's a great way to get together with your friends and do it as a community. So it won't seem as
Mhm.
weird sitting alone trying to write about your last possessions. Like sit there and like have tea and cake and talk about like, oh, I want you to take care of my cats. And don't worry,
Yes.
I'll give you some money to do so. Like, no, I want your dog. Oh, you can take the dog too. You
Yeah.
know, and just make it something that we talk about
Mhm.
and enjoy with each other. I don't think that when the time comes, we'll be quite as afraid.
And I think that is just another layer of that, and with especially writing a will, because I'm not here to execute it. You know, we're putting all this on there, and absolutely, will you have moments of thinking, you know, like get an ick from doing this? For sure, you will. But at the same time, you know, I've always come from a place of that people don't know stuff, right? I'm now, you're no longer here, and suddenly they're going to just magically know what it is that you wanted. It doesn't work like that. And so the more information that you can leave, the breadcrumbs, the whatever you want to call it, it just makes it easier for when to allow them to have the time to be with their grief
Yeah. To
rather
be
than,
sad, to miss you, to focus on that
yes.
rather than where did you leave your passwords and how much probate do I got to do and all that stuff. I mean, I
Exactly.
think that that's definitely something where if you're writing a will, don't think of it as I need to write this thing so that my, you know, descendants know what they get. Think of it as I'm trying to make life easier for them after I'm gone.
Yeah,
Or if for whatever reason I get sick, I want them to know, if I can't speak for myself, what I want,
exactly.
so they can be your voice.
Yes.
And I think if you invite your friends over, the people you trust or your family, and you say, you're the people I trust, here's why I'm putting you down to take care of this, this, and this. That's
Mhm.
a really loving thing to do for each other.
Absolutely. And but admittedly, not everybody in the family or not even everybody in your friend group is comfortable or ready to have that conversation,
Sure.
right?
And you have to
Um,
accept that.
absolutely, absolutely. But the one thing that I had said too, when talking to TJ about this very thing, was that this is a living document. I don't know how many times I've, set up a time with my lawyer and did a revision because life is different now than, my kids are no longer minors, or different things. Like, there's different stages in life, and so your circumstances and what you have is different. There's a lot of moving parts, and so it's a living document until you're dead, and then it's right. And so we need to be able
Yes.
to adjust and accommodate, with our choices as we are living too. So uh, it's a
But
vital.
an obit that you write is the same thing. It is your
Absolutely.
living document. I
Yeah.
mean, I see something happen to someone, and like I was reading an obit about a volcanologist, and I thought, I want volcanologist in my obituary. That's a cool name. How do I do that? Or I studied a class that I'd never heard of, and it was the study of alien biology, which I didn't even know that was a thing. Astrobiology, where we study the plant and animal possible life on other planets or in the solar system. So to go a whole class on this. And I'm like, astrobiologist sounds really sexy for an obit. I want to add that. So I'm constantly updating my obit or writing different versions. You just gotta like put it at the top. This is the final one.
Yeah,
And then you
exactly.
edit it again.
So
So
don't leave me
because
hanging. What is a volcanologist?
someone who studies volcanoes.
Oh, okay. So
How cool is that?
I was thinking Star Trek or something like that.
So did I, but it's after the like Roman god Vulcan for
Okay.
fire and hell, which is what they used to think, volcanoes were.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, they study volcanoes. And I'm like, how do I get to be a volcanologist? Because that just sounds cool in and of it.
So I can't see that being part of mine, but now I'm going to look for something crazy cool. And because why not? Like that's a brilliant idea. And I guess this can be, at this point, the lighter side of doing this, right? Like, maybe
Absolutely.
maybe you write, what turns out to be a novella or even a novel about your life, but you get down to the essence, and so that is a beautiful thing. So maybe you start off writing your obituary and you end up with a memoir. Nothing wrong with that either, right?
Absolutely. And I think there's a difference if let's say I'm known, this is a very famous example. Let's say I love cooking and baking, and I do, and I have a fantastic recipe for this one thing. If I wrote my own obit, I might include that recipe. But
Mm,
many years ago, there was a woman who was a rocket scientist in a time when women were not. And in the lead of her obit, they talked about her great recipe for this dish that she made. And it was because back in those days, they didn't look at women as being necessarily obit worthy, and they downplayed her achievements, which is horrifying, but it had really happened in the New York Times. So it's one of those things where if you absolutely want to make sure that what you're known for and what is important to you is out there, then writing your own obituary was a good way to start, or even just writing some notes for whoever writes your obit after you, whether it's a professional or a family member.
right. And I think, you had mentioned that people might use this as a last time to have a little poison pen to get the last word in. But I think it's an opportunity again to create connection. My kids have said this to me before, like, they don't the one doesn't necessarily believe that I had a life before she arrived, right? Like, that is her her,
Right.
her memories. Her memories start when she, uh, her life and on, but anything before that, it's a little bit, really, like, you did stuff, you went places and you whatever. So
You had fun. You
it's
caused trouble.
and so I guess it's a possibility that we get to, I guess, walk down our own memory lane as to what has been important signposts along our journey, the good and the bad,
Yeah.
and take a look at that timeline and to maybe draw from that what has shaped us, formed us, informed us, and how that is conveyed today. I think it's a very, very cool idea, something that I think everybody should be doing. And
I
even
would
those four.
also add, in our modern time, with the technology that we have, the written word will stay wherever it is. It's going to be available. If you have photos on film, people may not know who's in those photos anymore unless they were
Mhm.
labeled. Um, there is still some debate on whether some photos in the cloud are going to be remaining accessible after you die.
Right.
So if there is a way to create a recording of your voice or of your image and video and save it with your will and your living will and all those information, I would do that. I lost my best friend in my 20s. She was also in her 20s, and I would kill to have a recording of her laughing. I hear it in my head, but I would love to be able to just like see her smiling and saying
Mhm.
hello and have that. I wrote an obituary of a radio personality who I'd never listened to, but was recording till the very end in his hospital bed. And writing about his life was one thing, but listening to him talk, hearing how he laughed, hearing what was important to him, changed how I wrote the obituary. So if you
Okay.
can do that, leave a message for your friends and family to look at later, I highly recommend you do it. And you can do it today, and you can do many of them. Um, some people get sick very early. Some people don't get sick until they're 100. You just never know. You may have
Exactly.
an accident. You don't know. To have
Exactly.
this sitting there for them is a gift to the people
Oh,
who love you.
oh, what a brilliant idea. And I love that you've given resources as well for that so that people can, maybe start to browse legacy.com or their local newspaper if they still have obituaries in there. I think, as you said, those continue to be, paid by the word. So they're pretty factual. They get it done. But before we go, have you had, when it comes to including people in an obituary, their siblings, their children, when you mentioned about estrangement, how is that handled in the modern day? Like, is it okay for people to edit who gets included as being, um, who's left behind per se?
If it is a journalist written obituary, there's not a lot of survivors mentioned. They don't do that section anymore,
Okay. Okay.
unless their survivors are famous in some way. Like if they're a politician or a
Yeah.
famous actor or whatever, they were
Yeah.
the father of.
Yeah.
In general, that's just how they just want the space to do it, and they don't have the
Yeah.
time. If it is a family written one, the newspaper will pretty much run what you tell them, whether it's
Yeah.
accurate or not, because you're paying for it. And you will sometimes see two death notices of the same person with different survivors because some people got left off and they wanted to be included. There's a huge debate now about whether you should be able to include pets. But if you live alone with, two dogs and that's your only companionship, they survived you, like they were
Right.
your companions. Should you be
Yeah.
allowed to include them? In the past, you couldn't include your companions if you weren't married, if you were gay, things like that. That is changing. And now you
Yeah.
can. And it will depend on what newspaper you publish in. So,
Right.
yeah. So
But
I,
online,
I I tend to avoid the survivor section because it can be fraught with trouble, and I don't want to cause trouble in that time. I
huh,
don't want to add to the grief.
okay. And so, but if you're not paying to put it in the newspaper, but you're putting something online, your limitations are less, right? So you can
Totally, you
include
can
or
write whatever you want.
yeah,
And unfortunately, some people will write things that are harsh or not include people that didn't matter to them, and that is difficult
yes,
for the people who survive you.
yes,
Um, but that's the world we live in right now.
right,
Our,
yeah,
our our communities have changed in the past 50 years. So
yes. No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, this has been just a tremendous look inside the obituary world because, knock on wood again, not we don't necessarily have a lot of experience in being in that situation. I have been a number of times when it comes to creating an obituary, and of course, it was, as you said, very template, Nobody's interviewing other people to sort of get a different take. It is factual, it is survivors, it is, beginning and end. So as we unfortunately see less of those types of opportunities to have a lovely story in your local newspaper, that we still can tell that story in our own way and in our own words, and leave that, whether you publish just the facts, but as a gift per se to those who are left and who have survived you. And so what a beautiful invitation, and I think very life affirming if you're doing it for yourself. Would you agree?
I totally agree. And I also think that because we live in a world with cyberspace where we make friends who we never see in person, if you
Yes.
leave that obit behind, they're going to learn things about you they never knew because they only know one side of you. Or they may hear your voice for the first time when they've only seen you online all these years. So those are gifts that you're giving to them after you're gone.
Yes.
And writing your own obit or having someone work with you to write one will give you that pleasure in advance for yourself and then knowing what you're leaving behind.
Mm-hmm. And it absolutely has no connection or correlation as to your date of death. Let's just get
Yeah.
that out
No,
there.
well, and you also remember in obituary, only one line is death. That's
Right.
it. The rest of the story is about
Oh,
all the life that you lived. One line. That's it.
okay.
The
That
only
was
time you see more than that is if it's something extreme. You know, they were assassinated, they were murdered or whatever. Um, or if you have someone who took their own life, you may see at the bottom a link to the suicide hotline. Or if
yes.
someone had breast cancer, you may see donate to this breast cancer thing, which you have the ability to do in your own obit as well. There are charities you like, promote them, you know? So that's a way to do that. But yeah, death is only one line.
Oh,
So try
that
and
I
think of it that way.
death is only one line. I think that has to be the mantra when you sit down to do this, especially if you get a little bit of the heebie-jeebies, right? And absolutely allow the heebie-jeebies to come. You are talking about your mortality, but you're talking about your life. You're living right now. But I just want to, sort of um in a way of, just because you've written it down does not mean that, as I said, you're going to keel over in your chair after you put your pen down or click save on your document. It is a living document, something that can change multiple times, include whatever it is that you want, so that the world sees you through your eyes, and if you can get your friends or people that are important to you to share their stories, you get their take, their perspective of you too. I think that's it.
Exactly. And when I write advance obits of people or professionally write one, when I write the first line, I put instead of death, died of XX at age XX. And
Yeah.
that gives you a chance to just like move on, like just XX, not going to think about it, and
Yeah.
now start writing. Because that doesn't matter. That's
Yes.
the only thing that someone else is going to fill out.
Yeah. This is your
Sometimes we have
critical.
fun and start having crazy ways, like, what fun way could we die? She died while saving a bus of nuns.
Exactly. While uh, accepting the Nobel Peace Prize,
Exactly.
at the Champagne,
She stepped foot on Mars as the first person, planted the flag, and then died.
that's right. Yeah,
But she
exactly.
did it. She was first.
So there certainly can be some levity to this, but you're right, this is all about your life, and
Yes,
only one line is about your death. I love that. I love that you pointed that out, and I think that's an important takeaway and an important thing to remember when even considering or talking about this, because I hope people are going to watch this and that they're going to talk about this and maybe start to make some notes in their death file, and start to put something together, because as you said, your enthusiasm in order to share the stories, and the privilege that you've experienced being able to tell other people's stories, that's an energy changer. That certainly gives you a broader sense and a broader connection to what, obituaries, unfortunately, what they're for, what the end result, why we have them, but that process and the story, the essence of who you are. What a beautiful thing.
thank you. It's been a delight talking to you.
Well, I am so grateful, and I'm going to have links so that everybody can subscribe to and read. And I got to say, Jade can has shared a couple YouTube video links. Her The End Files has been such a fantastic newsletter to read simply because I've learned so many things about other cultures. You've had some interesting stuff about that. Also, other people talking about grief and death and hospice and all of those things. And I so appreciate your attention to the detail and how comprehensive, but yet at the same time not overwhelming when it comes to the information. So thank you very much. I'm so happy that that you had the time and took the time to do this. But all of your links to all of your Substacks I'll include in the post, and I hope that everybody signs up and subscribes to you, because it is certainly time well spent, as today was. Thank you, Jade.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You too.